Part 1, Into the Amazon Night. Hello there, and welcome to this quiet space we're sharing tonight. Before we begin our journey together into the deep Amazon, I want to check in with you. How was your day today? Perhaps it was filled with the usual rush of responsibilities, or maybe it brought unexpected challenges that left you feeling a bit scattered. Maybe you're carrying some stress in your shoulders, or there's a restless energy in your mind that just won't settle. Whatever you're bringing into this moment, whether it's curiosity about the strange and unexplained, fatigue from a long day, or even a touch of anxiety about the unknown, I want you to know that all of it is perfectly okay. There's no right or wrong way to feel as you listen to this story. You don't need to analyze anything or solve any mysteries tonight. You don't need to decide what's real or what isn't. All you need to do is breathe, settle in, and let your mind wander where it wants to go. Tonight, we're going to explore together one of the most intriguing and mysterious events reported from the Amazon rainforest in recent years. It's a story that sparked debate, wonder, and countless questions, but we're going to move through it slowly, thoughtfully, like a gentle river finding its way through the forest. If you're enjoying this peaceful approach to exploring mysteries, I'd be grateful if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps others find these calming stories when they need them most. Now let yourself sink a little deeper into whatever surface is supporting you. Close your eyes if that feels comfortable, or let your gaze soften. We're going to travel together to a place far from the noise of modern life, to a small village tucked away in the vast green heart of Peru's Amazon basin. Our story begins in the year 2023, in a place where the modern world feels very far away. The village of San Antonio de Pintuyacu sits quietly in Peru's Loreto region, surrounded by the endless green tapestry of the Amazon rainforest. If you were to look at this place on a map, you'd find it nestled along the banks of a tributary that feeds into the mighty Amazon River system, in an area where indigenous communities have lived for generations, their lives intimately connected to the rhythms of the forest. San Antonio de Pintuyacu is not a large place. Perhaps a few hundred people call it home. Their house is simple structures that blend naturally with the surrounding jungle. The air here is thick and humid, filled with the constant symphony of insects, birds, and the rustling of leaves that never seems to cease. During the day, the canopy filters sunlight into dappled patterns that dance across the forest floor. At night, the darkness is profound, broken only by the occasional flickering of kerosene lamps or the pale glow of a battery-powered radio. The people who live here know the forest intimately. They understand its moods, its dangers, and its gifts. They can read the sky for weather, identify plants that heal and plants that harm, and move through the jungle pathways with the confidence that comes from generations of accumulated knowledge. Their lives follow patterns that have remained largely unchanged for decades, fishing in the rivers, cultivating small plots of land, gathering forest medicines, and maintaining the delicate balance between human community and the vast wilderness that surrounds them. It was into this peaceful, routine existence that something extraordinary allegedly occurred in the summer of 2023. The exact date varies slightly depending on which report you read, but most sources place the initial incidents in July, during the dry season when the forest paths are more passable, and the river levels have dropped to expose sandy beaches, where children play, and adults gather to wash clothes and share news. The first reports were quiet, whispered conversations between neighbours, the kind of tentative sharing that happens when something so unusual occurs that people aren't quite sure how to talk about it. According to these early accounts, several villagers claim to have seen strange lights moving through the forest canopy at night. Not the familiar glow of fireflies or the brief flash of lightning, but steady, purposeful lights that seem to navigate deliberately through the trees. These weren't isolated sightings by a single person. Multiple villagers, people who had lived their entire lives in the forest and knew every natural phenomenon it contained, were reporting seeing things they couldn't explain. The lights were described as having an unusual quality, not quite like electric bulbs, not like fire, but something that seemed to emit its own clean, steady illumination. As word of these sightings spread through the small community, more people began paying attention to the night sky and the forest around them. Some reported hearing unfamiliar sounds, not the usual calls of night birds or the movement of large animals, but mechanical humming noises that seemed to come from above the treetops. Others claimed to have seen dark shapes moving against the stars, objects that blocked out portions of the night sky as they passed overhead. The villagers' initial response was one of cautious concern mixed with curiosity. These were people accustomed to the unexpected. The Amazon is full of mysteries, from unusual animal behaviours to weather patterns that can change rapidly. But what they were describing fell outside their vast knowledge of forest life. The lights and shapes didn't match any natural phenomenon they recognised, nor did they resemble the occasional aircraft that might pass over their remote location. As July progressed, the reports became more detailed and more frequent. Villagers began to organise informal watch groups, gathering in small clusters during the evening hours to scan the sky and forest edge. They shared stories of what they had seen, comparing details and trying to make sense of the experiences. Some wondered if the phenomena might be related to illegal mining or logging operations that sometimes encroach on protected forest areas, using unfamiliar equipment that could produce strange lights and sounds. Others suggested the possibility of military activity, though the remoteness of their location made this seem unlikely. Still others wondered if they were witnessing some new form of wildlife behaviour, perhaps bioluminescent creatures adapting to changes in their environment. But none of these explanations seemed to fully account for what people were reporting. The atmosphere in San Antonio de Pintuyacu began to shift subtly. The usual evening routines continued. Families still gathered for meals, children still played in the fading light, adults still sat together to discuss the day's work. But there was an undercurrent of watchfulness, a heightened awareness of the sky and forest that hadn't been there before. People found themselves glancing upward more often, listening more carefully to unfamiliar sounds, and sharing their observations with neighbours in quiet, thoughtful conversations. It was during this period of increased attention and anticipation that the events escalated from mysterious lights and sounds to something far more extraordinary. What happened next would transform a local curiosity into a story that would eventually reach news outlets around the world, sparking debates about the nature of reality, the limits of human knowledge, and the possibility that we're not alone in the universe. But those dramatic developments were still to come. For now, in these early days of July 2023, San Antonio de Pintuyacu remained a peaceful village where people went about their daily lives while keeping one eye on the sky, wondering what the strange lights might mean and whether they would see them again. The forest itself seemed unchanged, the same towering trees, the same winding rivers, the same abundant life that had flourished here for millennia. Only the human inhabitants carried a new awareness, a sense that something unusual was happening in their quiet corner of the world. They couldn't have known then that their small village was about to become the centre of one of the most discussed and debated alleged extraterrestrial encounters in recent history. As we settle deeper into this story together, let your breathing slow and deepen. Feel yourself sinking into the mysterious atmosphere of those summer nights in the Amazon, where the boundary between the known and unknown seemed to be shifting, and where ordinary people were about to experience something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about their world. Part 2. The Night. Everything changed. It was on the evening of July 11th, 2023, according to most accounts, that the situation in San Antonio de Pintuyacu shifted from curious to extraordinary. The sun had set hours earlier, and the village had settled into its familiar nighttime rhythm. Kerosene lamps cast warm pools of light in a few scattered homes, while most families had already retired to their simple beds, lulled by the constant symphony of the forest at night. Jairo Reyna Flores, a 41-year-old father and member of the local community, was among those still awake. Like many villagers, he had been paying closer attention to the night sky since the strange lights had first been reported weeks earlier. The forest around his home was dark and still, with only the usual sounds of nocturnal creatures going about their ancient business. What happened next, according to Jairo's later testimony, began as a disturbance in the natural order of things. The normal forest sounds, the calling of night birds, the rustle of small animals in the undergrowth, the distant splash of fish jumping in the river, began to fade into an unusual quiet. It was the kind of silence that sometimes precedes a storm, when even the insects seem to pause in anticipation of change. Then, cutting through this expectant stillness, came a sound that Jairo described as unlike anything he had heard before. It was a low, mechanical humming that seemed to emanate from above the forest canopy, not the familiar drone of an airplane which occasionally passed over their remote location, but something closer, more immediate, and strangely rhythmic. As Jairo listened, trying to identify the source of the sound, he noticed a light beginning to appear through the trees. At first, it was barely visible, just a faint glow that might have been dismissed as moonlight filtering through the leaves. But as seconds passed, the light grew stronger and more defined, moving in a way that natural phenomena simply don't move. According to his account, what Jairo saw next challenged every assumption he had about the world around him. Descending slowly through the forest canopy came what he described as a circular craft, perhaps 3 meters in diameter, emanating a soft but brilliant light that illuminated the trees and jungle floor beneath it. The object moved with deliberate purpose, navigating between the massive tree trunks with a precision that suggested intelligence and control. Jairo later told reporters that his first instinct was not fear, but fascination. This was something entirely outside his experience, yet it was happening right in front of him, as real and present as the ground beneath his feet. He watched as the craft continued its descent, finally coming to rest in a small clearing, perhaps 50 meters from where he stood. For several minutes, according to his testimony, nothing happened. The craft sat silently in the clearing, its light dimmed but still visible, while the forest around it remained unnaturally quiet. Jairo found himself frozen, not from terror, but from the overwhelming strangeness of the moment. Here, in a place where his family had lived for generations, where every tree and path was familiar, something impossible was occurring. Then, as he watched, figures began to emerge from the craft. Jairo's description of these beings, given in multiple interviews in the weeks that followed, was detailed and consistent. He described them as approximately 1.2 meters tall, roughly 4 feet, with an appearance that was distinctly non-human, yet somehow not entirely alien. They had large heads, oversized in proportion to their bodies, and what appeared to be large dark eyes that reflected the ambient light. What struck Jairo most forcefully, he later explained, was not their physical appearance, but their behavior. These beings moved through the forest with a familiarity that suggested they had been there before. They seemed to know exactly where they were going, navigating the jungle terrain with the confidence of creatures perfectly adapted to their environment. Some appeared to be collecting samples, plants, soil, perhaps insects, while others seemed to be conducting some form of systematic exploration of the area. Jairo watched this extraordinary scene unfold for what he estimated to be nearly an hour. During this time, he remained hidden, observing but not interfering. The beings appeared to be completely absorbed in their work, moving methodically through the forest clearing and the surrounding area. Occasionally they would pause and seem to communicate with each other, though Jairo heard no sounds that resembled human speech. As suddenly as they had arrived, the beings began to retreat back toward their craft. Jairo watched as they disappeared inside the circular object, which then began to emit a brighter light and a more pronounced humming sound. Within moments, the craft lifted off from the clearing, rising vertically through the forest canopy with the same controlled precision it had shown during its descent. When the light finally disappeared above the treetops and the mechanical humming faded into the distance, the natural sounds of the forest gradually returned. Birds resumed their calling, insects began their nighttime chorus, and the river continued its eternal murmur through the darkness. It was as if the forest itself had been holding its breath during the visitation and was now returning to its normal rhythm. Jairo remained motionless for a long time after the craft disappeared, trying to process what he had witnessed. This was a man who had spent his entire life in the Amazon, someone who understood the forest and its creatures as intimately as anyone could. He knew the difference between reality and imagination, between the possible and the impossible, yet what he had just experienced seemed to exist in a category all its own. When he finally returned to his home, Jairo faced a dilemma that many witnesses of extraordinary events encounter. Should he tell others what he had seen, knowing that such a story would likely be met with skepticism, or should he keep this experience to himself? The weight of what he had witnessed, combined with his position as a respected member of the community, ultimately convinced him that he had a responsibility to share his account. The next morning, Jairo began quietly telling a few trusted neighbours about his experience. Word spread quickly through the small village, as news always does in close-knit communities. Some listeners were sceptical, suggesting that Jairo might have misidentified some natural phenomenon, or perhaps been the victim of an elaborate hoax. Others, however, remembered the strange lights and sounds they had been reporting for weeks, and began to wonder if Jairo's encounter might explain what they had been seeing. More significantly, Jairo's account encouraged other villagers to come forward with their own experiences. Within days, several additional witnesses had shared stories of strange sightings, encounters with unusual beings, and mysterious activities in the forest around their village. A pattern began to emerge: multiple people, all describing similar phenomena occurring over a period of several weeks. Among these additional witnesses was Segundo Kuluya, another village resident who claimed to have had his own encounter with the mysterious beings several days after Jairo's experience. Segundo's account included details that corroborated aspects of Jairo's story, while adding new elements that would prove crucial to understanding the full scope of what allegedly occurred in San Antonio de Pintuyacu during that remarkable summer. As news of these encounters spread beyond the village, they began to attract attention from researchers, journalists, and government officials. What had started as whispered conversations between neighbours was about to become an international story that would raise profound questions about the nature of reality and humanity's place in the universe. But even as these extraordinary claims were beginning to spread to the wider world, life in San Antonio de Pintuyacu continued much as it always had. People still fished the rivers, tended their small plots of land, and gathered in the evenings to share meals and conversation. The difference was that now, when darkness fell, many villagers found themselves looking up at the sky with new eyes, wondering what other mysteries the vast Amazon might hold, and whether the visitors they claimed to have encountered might return. Let yourself rest in this moment of wondering, this space between the known and the unknown. There's something deeply peaceful about contemplating mysteries that have no easy answers, allowing our minds to explore possibilities without the pressure to reach conclusions. As we continue this journey together, we're creating space for both skepticism and wonder, for both scientific inquiry and the simple human experience of encountering something that challenges our understanding of the world. Part 3. Voices from the Forest. In the days following Jairo Reyna Flores' extraordinary encounter, San Antonio de Pintuyacu found itself in a state of quiet transformation. Word of his experience had spread through the village with the particular intensity that accompanies truly unusual news. In a community where everyone knows everyone else, where trust is built through generations of shared experience, Gyro's reputation as a reliable, level-headed member of the community gave weight to his incredible claims. It was during this period of heightened awareness and discussion that Segundo Kuluya decided to share his own story. Segundo, a 50-year-old villager who had lived in the area for most of his adult life, had initially been reluctant to speak about what he had experienced. Like many people who witness extraordinary events, he had wondered if what he had seen was real, if his memory could be trusted, and whether sharing such a story would damage his standing in the community. But hearing Jairo's detailed account, with its specific descriptions and matter-of-fact delivery, convinced Segundo that he was not alone in his experience. What he had to share would add crucial details to the emerging picture of what had allegedly occurred in their peaceful corner of the Amazon. Segundo's encounter had taken place 3 nights after Jairo's, on July 14, 2023. Like Jairo, he had been awake later than usual, sitting outside his home and enjoying the relative coolness that comes after the intense heat of an Amazonian day. The forest around his dwelling was alive with its usual nighttime activity. The calls of frogs from the nearby stream, the rustle of small mammals in the undergrowth, and the distant splash of larger creatures moving through the water. According to Segundo's account, his attention was first drawn to an unusual disturbance in the natural rhythm of these familiar sounds. The forest grew gradually quieter, as if some invisible presence was moving through it, causing the wildlife to pause in their nocturnal activities. This was not entirely unprecedented. Large predators sometimes created similar effects as they moved through their territory, but something about this particular silence felt different to Segundo, more purposeful and widespread than what a jaguar or other large animal would typically cause. As he sat listening to this expanding quiet, Segundo began to notice a faint light moving through the trees approximately 100 meters from his home. At first, he assumed it might be another villager walking the forest paths with a flashlight or lantern, though it was unusually late for such activity. But as he watched more carefully, the light's behavior began to seem strange. It moved too smoothly, too steadily, and it appeared to be floating above the ground rather than following the familiar pathways that connected the village to the river and hunting areas. Segundo's curiosity overcame his caution, and he began to move quietly toward the light, staying within the shadows of the larger trees and moving with the stealth that comes naturally to people who have spent their lives in the forest. As he drew closer, what he saw challenged his understanding of reality as fundamentally as Jairo's experience had challenged his. The light, according to Segundo's testimony, was emanating from a figure that was unmistakably non-human. Standing approximately 4 feet tall, with an oversized head and large, dark eyes that seemed to reflect the surrounding environment, the being was moving through the forest with purpose and familiarity. It carried what Segundo described as some kind of device that emitted the steady light, and it appeared to be examining various plants and trees with careful attention. What struck Segundo most powerfully was the being's apparent comfort in the forest environment. This was not a creature struggling to navigate unfamiliar terrain, but something that moved through the jungle with the confidence of long familiarity. It avoided obstacles without looking directly at them, navigated the uneven ground without stumbling, and seemed to know exactly where it was going and what it was looking for. Segundo watched from his concealed position for nearly 30 minutes as the being conducted what appeared to be a systematic survey of the area. It would pause at certain trees, examining their bark or leaves with its device. It collected samples of various plants, storing them in what looked like a small container attached to its body. Most remarkably, it seemed to show particular interest in areas where human activity had left subtle marks on the forest, places where villagers had harvested certain plants, or where trails had been worn by repeated passage. During this observation period, Segundo reported seeing 2 additional beings emerge from deeper in the forest. These appeared identical to the first, and they moved with the same purposeful familiarity through the jungle terrain. The three beings seemed to communicate with each other, though Segundo heard no sounds that resembled human speech. Their interaction appeared to be coordinated, suggesting they were working together toward a common goal. As Segundo continued to watch, one of the beings began to move in his direction. For a moment he feared he had been discovered, but the being's attention seemed focused on something else entirely. It approached a large cecropia tree that grew near Segundo's hiding place, and began to examine it with particular interest. The tree was one that villagers had been harvesting bark from for medicinal purposes, and the being seemed to be studying the areas where human hands had made cuts in the trunk. It was at this moment, according to Segundo's account, that something extraordinary occurred. The being appeared to notice his presence, turning toward his hiding place with those large, dark eyes. For several seconds, human and non-human regarded each other across the forest clearing. Segundo later described feeling not fear, but a profound sense of recognition, as if some form of communication was taking place without words, without any familiar form of interaction. Then, as suddenly as the moment had begun, it ended. The being turned away and moved back toward its companions. Within minutes, all three figures had disappeared deeper into the forest, their lights fading until only the familiar darkness remained. The normal sounds of the night gradually returned, and Segundo found himself alone with an experience that would change his understanding of the world forever. Like Jairo before him, Segundo faced the challenge of deciding whether to share what he had witnessed. The addition of his testimony to Jairo's created a pattern that was difficult to dismiss. Two respected members of the community, encountering similar phenomena within days of each other, both describing beings that matched in their general characteristics, while differing in specific details of behavior and activity. As word of Segundo's encounter spread through the village, other residents began to reconsider their own recent experiences. Carmen Tello, a village mother and healer who worked with traditional forest medicines, came forward with her own story of unusual occurrences during the same time period. While she had not seen the beings directly, she reported finding evidence of their presence, unusual markings on trees, areas where plants had been harvested in ways that didn't match human or animal activity, and most intriguingly, locations where her carefully tended medicinal gardens showed signs of having been systematically examined. Carmen's expertise in forest botany lent additional credibility to the emerging narrative. She knew every plant in the surrounding area, understood their growth patterns and seasonal changes, and could distinguish between damage caused by animals, weather, human activity, and disease. What she had discovered in the days following the reported encounters didn't fit any of these familiar categories. According to Carmen's testimony, someone or something had been conducting a detailed survey of the village's medicinal plants. Areas where villagers grew traditional healing herbs showed signs of careful examination, with samples taken in ways that suggested both knowledge and respect for the plant's well-being. Whoever had done this work understood plant biology well enough to take samples without damaging the parent plants, and had focused specifically on species known for their therapeutic properties. This detail added a new dimension to the story emerging from San Antonio de Pintuyacu. The beings that Jairo and Segundo described were not simply passing through the area or conducting random exploration. They appeared to be studying the relationship between the human community and the forest environment, paying particular attention to how villagers used forest resources for medicine and sustenance. Dr. Anthony Choi, a Peruvian researcher who had spent years investigating unexplained phenomena, arrived in the village in early August to interview witnesses and examine the evidence. His conversations with villagers revealed additional details that hadn't emerged in the initial accounts. Several residents reported that their domestic animals, dogs, chickens, and pigs, had exhibited unusual behavior during the period when the encounters were alleged to have occurred. The animals had become unusually quiet and seemed reluctant to venture into certain areas of the forest that they normally explored freely. Dogs that typically barked at any unfamiliar presence in the village had remained silent during the nights when the beings were allegedly present. Some villagers reported that their animals seemed to be aware of the visitors before any humans noticed them, displaying signs of alertness and anxiety hours before the actual sightings occurred. These animal behavior reports provided an additional layer of corroboration for the human testimonies. Animals, particularly domestic animals that live closely with humans, are often sensitive to environmental changes that people might miss. Their behavioral changes suggested that something unusual was indeed occurring in the area, regardless of what interpretation one might place on the human accounts. As more villagers shared their experiences and observations, a complex picture began to emerge of sustained contact between the small Amazonian community and something genuinely unknown. The beings appeared to have been studying the village and its inhabitants for an extended period, conducting. Part 4. When the World Takes Notice. By early August 2023, the story emerging from San Antonio de Pintuyacu had begun to reach beyond the village boundaries in ways that none of the original witnesses could have anticipated. What had started as whispered conversations between neighbours was transforming into something much larger, as researchers, journalists, and curious individuals from around Peru and beyond began to take notice of the remarkable claims coming from the remote Amazonian community. The transformation from local mystery to international story began when Carlos Espinosa, a journalist working for a regional Peruvian news outlet, received a tip about unusual events occurring in the Loreto region. Espinosa had spent years covering stories from rural Amazonian communities, and he had developed both a respect for indigenous knowledge and a healthy skepticism about claims that seemed too extraordinary to be true. But something about the consistency of the reports from San Antonio de Pintuyacu, combined with the credibility of the witnesses, convinced him that the story deserved serious investigation. Espinosa's journey to the village required considerable effort. San Antonio de Pintuyacu is not easily accessible by conventional transportation. The trip involved a combination of commercial flights to Iquitos, Peru's largest Amazonian city, followed by a lengthy boat journey up increasingly narrow waterways, and finally a challenging trek through jungle paths that existed more as suggestions than actual roads. This remoteness, which had helped preserve the village's traditional way of life, also meant that hoaxes or publicity stunts would be particularly difficult to orchestrate and maintain. When Espinosa finally reached the village in mid-August, he found a community that was still processing the extraordinary events of the previous month. The villagers were not seeking publicity or financial gain from their experiences. Many were actually reluctant to speak with outsiders about what they had witnessed, concerned that their stories would be dismissed or ridiculed. This reluctance, rather than undermining their credibility, actually enhanced it in Espinosa's view. These were not people seeking attention, but individuals grappling with experiences that had challenged their understanding of reality. Espinosa spent several days in San Antonio de Pintuyacu, conducting detailed interviews with Jairo Reina Flores, Segunda Culuya, Carmen Tello, and other villagers who claimed to have witnessed unusual phenomena. He also examined the physical evidence that Carmen had discovered, the unusual plant harvesting patterns, the strange markings on trees, and the areas where something had apparently conducted systematic botanical surveys. What impressed Espinosa most was the consistency of the accounts across multiple witnesses, combined with details that suggested genuine observation rather than fabrication. The villagers' descriptions of the beings included specific physical characteristics that remained consistent across different testimonies, yet also showed the kind of individual variation in perception that would be expected from genuine independent observations. Their accounts of the beings' behavior patterns, their apparent interest in medicinal plants, and their respectful interaction with the forest environment all suggested a level of detail that would be difficult to maintain in a coordinated deception. Furthermore, Espinosa discovered that the villagers had attempted to document their experiences in ways that demonstrated their sincerity. Several residents had tried to photograph or record the beings during their alleged visits, though the results were inconclusive. Blurry images that might show unusual lights or shapes, but nothing that could be considered definitive evidence. The fact that the villagers had attempted to gather evidence, despite the technical limitations of their equipment and the challenging lighting conditions, suggested they genuinely believed in the reality of their experiences. Espinosa's initial report, published in late August 2023, was measured and respectful. He presented the villagers' testimonies without sensationalism, acknowledging both the extraordinary nature of their claims and the credibility of the witnesses. He also noted the lack of any obvious motive for deception. The villagers' isolation meant that tourism or publicity would be unlikely to bring economic benefits, and the residents seemed genuinely concerned about how their stories might be received by the outside world. The publication of Espinosa's report created ripples that extended far beyond Peru's borders. International news outlets began picking up the story, though coverage varied widely in tone and credibility. Some publications treated the events seriously, focusing on the consistency of witness testimonies and the lack of obvious explanations for what the villagers described. Others approached the story with skepticism or sensationalism, either dismissing the accounts outright or presenting them as entertainment rather than genuine mystery. This varied coverage reflected the broader challenge that extraordinary claims face in modern media and scientific discourse. The alleged events in San Antonio de Pintuyacu existed in a space where conventional journalism struggled to find appropriate frameworks for evaluation. The stories were too specific and detailed to dismiss easily, yet they challenged fundamental assumptions about reality that made them difficult to accept without extraordinary evidence. Dr. Anthony Choi, the Peruvian researcher who had visited the village earlier, published his own analysis of the events in September 2023. His report included detailed maps of the areas where encounters had allegedly occurred, timelines correlating different witness accounts, and analysis of the physical evidence that had been discovered. Choi's background in investigating unexplained phenomena lent scientific credibility to his evaluation, though he was careful to present his findings as observations rather than conclusions. Choi noted several aspects of the San Antonio de Pintuyacu case that distinguished it from other alleged extraterrestrial encounters. The beings described by witnesses showed apparent familiarity with the local environment, suggesting sustained observation rather than brief visitation. Their interest in medicinal plants and human-forest interactions indicated purposeful study rather than random exploration. Most significantly, their behavior patterns suggested respect for both the natural environment and the human community, avoiding direct confrontation while conducting what appeared to be careful scientific investigation. As news of the alleged encounters spread through social media and international news networks, San Antonio de Pintuyacu found itself receiving unexpected visitors. Researchers, journalists, curiosity seekers, and believers in extraterrestrial visitation began making the difficult journey to the remote village, hoping to interview witnesses or perhaps experience something extraordinary themselves. This influx of outsiders created new challenges for the small community. The villagers had to balance their traditional hospitality with concerns about exploitation and misrepresentation. Some visitors approached the story with genuine scientific interest, conducting respectful interviews and careful documentation. Others seemed more interested in sensation than truth, pressing for dramatic details or attempting to profit from the villagers' experiences. The Peruvian government's response to the events was cautious and measured. Officials acknowledged that they had received reports of unusual phenomena in the Loreto region and stated that they were monitoring the situation. However, they stopped short of launching any official investigation or making definitive statements about the nature of what had allegedly occurred. This restrained response reflected both the government's reluctance to validate extraordinary claims without substantial evidence and their respect for indigenous communities' right to share their own experiences. International organizations with interests in both unexplained phenomena and indigenous rights began to take notice of the story. Some researchers specializing in the study of alleged extraterrestrial encounters noted similarities between the San Antonio de Pintuyacu accounts and other reported incidents from around the world. The beings described by the Peruvian villagers matched general characteristics that had been reported in other alleged encounters, yet showed specific behaviors that seemed adapted to their Amazonian environment. Anthropologists and sociologists also found the case intriguing, though for different reasons. The story provided insight into how isolated communities process and share extraordinary experiences and how traditional knowledge systems interact with phenomena that fall outside conventional understanding. The villagers' responses to their alleged encounters reflected their deep connection to the forest environment and their sophisticated understanding of natural systems, even when describing something that appeared to exist outside those systems. As autumn progressed in 2023, the initial intense media attention began to fade, but interest in the San Antonio de Pintuyacu case continued among researchers and individuals drawn to unexplained phenomena. The village gradually returned to its normal rhythms, though with the lasting change that comes from having one's understanding of reality fundamentally challenged. The witnesses continued to stand by their accounts, despite the scrutiny and occasional ridicule that their stories had attracted. The case remained unresolved in any conventional sense. No definitive physical evidence had been recovered that could prove or disprove the villagers' claims. No government agency had conducted an official investigation that reached conclusive findings. The alleged encounters existed in that ambiguous space where extraordinary human experiences meet the limitations of scientific methodology and institutional skepticism. Yet for the people of San Antonio de Pintuyacu, the events of July 2023 remained vivid and meaningful parts of their lived experience. They had witnessed something that challenged their understanding of the world, and they had found the courage to share those experiences despite the difficulties that such sharing entailed. Whether one interpreted their accounts as genuine contact with non-human intelligence, misidentification of natural phenomena, or something else entirely, the sincerity and consistency of their testimonies continued to pose profound questions about the nature of reality and the limits of human knowledge. The Amazon forest itself remained unchanged, continuing its ancient cycles of growth and decay, predator and prey, rain and sun. But for those who had lived through those extraordinary nights in July, the forest would forever hold the possibility that the universe contained mysteries beyond human comprehension, and that contact with the unknown might be closer than most people dared to imagine. Part 5. Theories and Mysteries. As the months passed following the alleged encounters in San Antonio de Pintuyacu, researchers and analysts from various fields began proposing explanations for what the villagers claimed to have experienced. These theories range from the scientifically conventional to the extraordinary, each attempting to account for the specific details and patterns that had emerged from the witness testimonies. The most conservative explanations focused on natural phenomena that might have been misinterpreted under challenging observation conditions. Some suggested that the villagers had encountered an unknown species of bioluminescent organism, perhaps insects or fungi that had adapted unusual light-producing capabilities in response to environmental changes. The Amazon rainforest continues to yield new species discoveries regularly, and it was conceivable that some previously unknown lifeform could produce the steady, directed illumination that witnesses described. However, this theory struggled to account for the structured, apparently intelligent behavior that multiple witnesses had observed. Bioluminescent organisms typically use their light for specific biological purposes like mating displays or predator deterrence, producing patterns that are recognizable as natural phenomena, The lights described by the villagers moved with purposeful direction and seemed to be operated by intelligent entities conducting systematic activities. Another conventional explanation proposed that the villagers had encountered illegal mining or logging operations using advanced technology. The Amazon region faces ongoing threats from unauthorized resource extraction, and it was possible that sophisticated equipment, perhaps drones equipped with powerful lights and sampling devices, could have created the phenomena that the villagers described. This theory could potentially explain both the mechanical sounds and the systematic collection activities that witnesses reported, yet this explanation also faced significant challenges. The remoteness of San Antonio de Pintuyacu made it an unlikely target for resource extraction, as the costs of transporting equipment and extracted materials would be prohibitive. Moreover, the beings described by witnesses were clearly organic entities, not mechanical devices, and their behavior patterns suggested familiarity with the forest environment that would be unlikely in human operators of unfamiliar technology. Some researchers proposed psychological explanations for the encounters, suggesting that the villagers might have experienced shared hallucinations or culturally influenced misperceptions. Indigenous communities often have rich traditions of spiritual beliefs involving forest spirits and supernatural entities, and it was possible that atmospheric conditions, unusual natural phenomena, or psychological factors could have triggered experiences that were interpreted through these cultural frameworks. This theory gained some support from anthropologists who noted that many indigenous cultures have traditions of encountering otherworldly beings in forest settings. However, the witnesses in San Antonio de Pintuyacu had been careful to distinguish their experiences from traditional spiritual encounters. They described their sightings in matter-of-fact terms, emphasizing the physical reality of what they had observed rather than interpreting their experiences through supernatural or religious frameworks. Military activity provided another potential explanation that researchers explored. Peru's military forces occasionally conduct operations in remote Amazonian regions, and it was conceivable that some form of classified training exercise or experimental technology testing could have created the phenomena that villagers reported. Advanced military equipment might explain the technological aspects of the encounters, while the humanoid figures could have been personnel in specialized protective gear. However, military explanations also face substantial obstacles. The Peruvian military denied conducting any operations in the San Antonio de Pintuyacu area during the relevant time period. The behavior patterns described by witnesses, careful botanical sampling, systematic environmental study, apparent long-term observation of the community, did not match typical military objectives or methods. Most significantly, the physical characteristics of the beings described by witnesses differed substantially from what would be expected of humans in protective equipment. More speculative theories emerge from researchers willing to consider possibilities beyond conventional scientific frameworks. Some proposed that the villagers had encountered representatives of an unknown human civilization, perhaps descendants of pre-Columbian peoples who had developed in isolation and acquired advanced technologies through independent scientific development. This theory could potentially explain both the humanoid appearance of the entities and their apparent familiarity with Amazonian environments. Such explanations drew support from the ongoing archaeological discoveries that continue to reveal the sophistication of pre-Columbian Amazonian civilizations. Recent research has demonstrated that large, complex societies flourished in the Amazon for centuries before European contact, developing sophisticated agricultural and engineering technologies. It was conceivable, though highly speculative, that some groups might have maintained and advanced their technological capabilities in previously unknown ways. The most extraordinary explanation, of course, was that the villagers had genuinely encountered non-human intelligent entities, beings from elsewhere in the universe who had developed interstellar travel capabilities and were conducting scientific studies of Earth's environments and life forms. This interpretation took the witness testimonies at face value and assumed that the entity's apparent interest in medicinal plants and human-forest interactions reflected a sophisticated scientific agenda pursued by visitors from beyond Earth. Supporters of this extraterrestrial hypothesis pointed to several aspects of the San Antonio de Pintuyacu case that distinguished it from many other alleged encounter reports. The being's behavior patterns suggested genuine scientific interest rather than random exploration. Their apparent respect for the environment and non-interference with the human community indicated sophisticated ethical frameworks. Most significantly, their focus on studying the relationship between indigenous peoples and forest ecosystems suggested advanced understanding of ecological and anthropological concepts. Independent researchers who specialized in analyzing alleged extraterrestrial encounters noted similarities between the San Antonio de Pintuyacu reports and other cases from around the world. The physical characteristics described by the Peruvian villagers matched general patterns reported in many other alleged encounters, beings of small stature with oversized heads and large dark eyes. However, the specific behaviors and apparent objectives described in Peru showed adaptations to the local environment that suggested either genuine observational accuracy or remarkably sophisticated cultural knowledge on the part of any potential hoaxers. The botanical focus of the alleged encounters particularly intrigued researchers familiar with other reported cases. Many alleged extraterrestrial encounters include reports of beings showing interest in Earth's plant life, but the specific attention to medicinal species and traditional healing practices described in San Antonio de Pintuyacu suggested unusually sophisticated understanding of human ethnobotanical knowledge. This detail either supported the authenticity of the encounters or indicated remarkably well-informed fabrication. Skeptical analysts continued to search for conventional explanations that could account for all aspects of the villagers' testimonies. Some proposed complex scenarios involving combinations of natural phenomena, technological activities, and psychological factors that might have created the reported experiences. Others suggested that cultural contamination from exposure to popular media depictions of extraterrestrial beings might have influenced the villagers' interpretations of ambiguous sensory experiences. However, the isolation of San Antonio de Pintuyacu made cultural contamination scenarios less plausible. The villagers had limited exposure to international media, and their descriptions of the entities included specific details that differed from typical popular culture depictions. Their emphasis on the being's apparent scientific activities and environmental familiarity showed sophistication that was unlikely to derive from casual exposure to science fiction narratives. As the first anniversary of the alleged encounters approached, the case remained as mysterious as ever. No theory had emerged that could satisfactorily explain all aspects of the villagers' testimonies without requiring either acceptance of extraordinary possibilities or dismissal of credible witness accounts. The events in San Antonio de Pintuyacu continued to exist in that ambiguous space where human experience meets the limits of conventional explanation. The villagers themselves had largely returned to their traditional routines, though their perspectives on the world around them had been permanently altered. They continued to share their experiences with respectful visitors, maintaining consistency in their accounts while acknowledging that they could not prove what they had witnessed. Their quiet dignity in the face of both skepticism and sensationalism demonstrated the authenticity of their commitment to truth as they understood it. The forest around San Antonio de Pintuyacu remained as mysterious and beautiful as ever, its ancient trees continuing their slow growth toward the canopy, its rivers flowing endlessly toward the Amazon, its countless species pursuing their eternal cycles of survival and reproduction. Yet for those who had experienced those extraordinary nights in July 2023, the forest would forever hold the possibility that reality contained layers of mystery that human science had not yet begun to fathom. The case had raised profound questions about the nature of evidence, the limits of scientific methodology, and the relationship between human knowledge and cosmic possibility. Whether the villagers had encountered visitors from another world, representatives of an unknown terrestrial civilization, or something else entirely, their experiences had demonstrated that the universe remained capable of surprising those who thought they understood its boundaries. In the end, perhaps the most important aspect of the San Antonio de Pintuyacu case was not the question of what the villagers had actually encountered, but their courage in sharing experiences that challenged conventional understanding. In a world increasingly dominated by technological certainty and scientific materialism, their willingness to testify to mysteries they could not explain served as a reminder that reality might be far stranger and more wonderful than most people dared to imagine. Part 6. The Deeper Mystery. In the quiet months that followed the intense scrutiny and debate surrounding the alleged encounters in San Antonio de Pintuyacu, something subtle but profound had shifted in the way the villagers related to their forest home. The experience of witnessing something beyond their previous understanding, combined with the challenge of sharing that experience with a skeptical world, had deepened their connection to the mysteries that surrounded them daily. Carmen Tello, the village healer whose botanical expertise had provided crucial evidence for the alleged visitations, found herself approaching her traditional medicine work with renewed wonder. The plants she had harvested and prepared for generations now seemed to hold even deeper secrets than she had previously recognized. The careful way the unknown beings had apparently studied her medicinal gardens suggested that the healing properties of Amazonian flora might be appreciated by intelligences far beyond human understanding. As she moved through the forest, collecting herbs and preparing traditional remedies, Carmen often found herself wondering what other knowledge the plants might contain. The beings' apparent interest in the relationship between humans and forest medicine suggested that indigenous healing traditions might represent something more significant than even she had realized. Perhaps a form of scientific knowledge that transcended cultural boundaries and attracted attention from throughout the cosmos. Jairo Reyna Flores, whose initial encounter had begun the remarkable series of events, discovered that his experience had fundamentally altered his relationship with the night. Where once he had moved through the darkness with the confidence of long familiarity, he now approached nighttime with a heightened awareness that combined respect, curiosity, and a subtle but persistent hope that he might encounter the mysterious visitors again. The month since his first sighting had passed without further direct encounters, but Jairo remained convinced that the beings continued to observe the village from a distance. Occasionally he noticed subtle signs that suggested their continued presence. Unusual arrangements of forest materials, areas where plants had been examined with the same careful precision he had witnessed during his encounter, moments when the forest fell into that particular silence that had preceded their appearance. Segundo Kaluuya found that his brief moment of apparent communication with one of the beings had left him with a lasting sense of connection to something vast and incomprehensible. The memory of looking into those large dark eyes and feeling recognized by an intelligence unlike anything in his previous experience continued to resonate through his daily life. He began to pay closer attention to the subtle patterns and rhythms of the forest, wondering if he might detect signs of the beings' continued presence, or perhaps understand their purposes more clearly. The children of San Antonio de Pintuyacu, too young to fully grasp the implications of what their elders claimed to have witnessed, nonetheless absorbed the sense of mystery and possibility that had settled over their community. They played games that incorporated elements of the encounter stories, imagining themselves as forest explorers discovering strange visitors, or as scientists studying unknown forms of life. Their innocent incorporation of these extraordinary experiences into their normal childhood activities demonstrated how easily human consciousness could expand to accommodate new possibilities. The village's relationship with visiting researchers and journalists had evolved as well. After the initial flood of outsiders seeking sensational stories or definitive proof, a smaller number of serious researchers had continued to visit San Antonio de Pintuyacu, drawn by the consistency and detail of the witness testimonies. These ongoing interactions had created a dialogue between traditional indigenous knowledge and contemporary scientific methodology that enriched both perspectives. Dr. Anthony Choi maintained regular contact with the village, documenting any additional unusual occurrences and slowly building a comprehensive record of the events and their aftermath. His respectful approach and genuine interest in understanding rather than exploiting the villagers' experiences had earned their trust and continued cooperation. Through his work, the case remained alive in serious research circles, though it received less attention from mainstream media as time passed. The broader implications of the San Antonio de Pintuyacu case continued to ripple through various fields of study and speculation. Anthropologists found in the villagers' experiences a fascinating example of how isolated communities process and integrate extraordinary events into their understanding of reality. The fact that the witnesses had maintained consistent accounts despite skepticism and scrutiny suggested either remarkable coordination in fabrication or genuine conviction based on authentic experience. Researchers studying alleged extraterrestrial encounters noted several aspects of the Peruvian case that distinguished it from many other reported incidents. The beings' apparent long-term study of the community, their sophisticated understanding of local ecology, and their respectful non-interference with human activities suggested a level of intelligence and ethical development that was rarely described in encounter reports. These characteristics either supported the authenticity of the accounts or indicated unusually thoughtful fabrication. The case also contributed to ongoing discussions about the nature of evidence and the limits of scientific methodology when confronting claims about extraordinary phenomena. The villagers had provided consistent, detailed testimonies from multiple credible witnesses, yet conventional science demanded physical evidence that such encounters rarely produced. This disconnect highlighted fundamental questions about how human knowledge systems evaluate claims that fall outside established frameworks of understanding. Environmental scientists found particular interest in the being's apparent focus on medicinal plants and human-forest interactions. If the encounters were genuine, they suggested that Earth's biodiversity and indigenous knowledge systems might be of significant interest to non-human intelligences. This possibility added new dimensions to arguments for preserving both natural ecosystems and traditional cultures, framing them not just as valuable human heritage but as potentially important to cosmic understanding. As the second anniversary of the alleged encounters approached, San Antonio de Pintuyacu had settled into a new equilibrium. The village remained physically unchanged. The same simple houses, the same forest paths, the same river flowing past on its way to join the Amazon. But the community's collective consciousness had been permanently expanded by their brush with the unknown. They had learned that their quiet corner of the world might be connected to mysteries spanning the cosmos. The villagers continued their traditional ways of life, fishing and farming and gathering forest medicines as their ancestors had done for generations. But they did so with an enhanced awareness of the possibility that their activities were being observed and appreciated by intelligences beyond human understanding. This knowledge brought both wonder and responsibility, wonder at the vast possibilities that existence might contain, and responsibility to maintain their respectful relationship with the forest that had apparently attracted such extraordinary attention. Late at night, when the village settled into sleep and the forest came alive with its nocturnal symphony, many residents found themselves listening more carefully to the sounds around them. Most nights brought only the familiar calls of owls and frogs, the rustle of small mammals, and the distant murmur of the river, but occasionally someone would notice a subtle change in the forest's rhythm, a moment of unusual quiet, or a brief glimpse of light moving through the trees that might or might not be anything extraordinary. The question of whether the beings would return remained unanswered. Some villagers believed that the visitors had completed whatever study they had been conducting and moved on to other locations or other worlds. Others felt certain that the beings remained nearby, continuing their observations from a greater distance, perhaps waiting for humanity to develop the wisdom necessary for more open contact. Carmen Tello often spoke of feeling watched while she worked in her medicinal gardens, not in a threatening way, but with the sense that her traditional healing practices were being observed and appreciated by intelligences that understood their deeper significance. She had begun keeping more detailed records of her plant preparations and healing methods, driven by an intuition that this knowledge might someday be important in ways she could not yet fathom. The children who had grown up hearing the encounter stories developed a unique relationship with the forest around them. They moved through the jungle with a combination of traditional indigenous knowledge and an openness to possibilities that their elders had only recently discovered. Some claimed to have seen unusual lights or movements that might have been continuations of the original encounters, though these newer reports were more tentative and less detailed than the dramatic events of July 2023. As years passed, the San Antonio de Pintuyacu case became part of a larger conversation about humanity's place in the universe, and the possibility that Earth had been receiving visitors from elsewhere for far longer than most people realized. The villagers' accounts joined a growing collection of similar reports from remote locations around the world, suggesting patterns of contact that official institutions remained reluctant to acknowledge or investigate. The Amazon rainforest itself continued to reveal new secrets to scientific exploration. Researchers regularly discovered previously unknown species of plants and animals, ancient archaeological sites that challenged assumptions about pre-Columbian civilizations, and ecological relationships of stunning complexity and sophistication. In this context of constant discovery, the possibility that the forest might also harbour evidence of non-human intelligence seemed less far-fetched than it might in more thoroughly mapped environments. Some researchers began to wonder if indigenous communities throughout the Amazon might have been experiencing similar encounters for generations, but lacking the frameworks or incentives to share such experiences with the outside world. The oral traditions of many Amazonian peoples included stories of encounters with strange beings that might be interpreted as either mythological narratives or historical accounts of actual contact with non-human intelligences. The villagers of San Antonio de Pintuyacu had demonstrated remarkable courage in sharing their experiences with a skeptical world. Their willingness to risk ridicule and misunderstanding in order to bear witness to what they had seen served as an inspiration to others who might have had similar experiences but lacked the confidence to speak publicly about them. In the broader context of human scientific and philosophical development, the case represented a challenge to conventional assumptions about the boundaries of reality and the nature of evidence. Whether the villagers had encountered extraterrestrial visitors, unknown terrestrial intelligences, or something else entirely, their experiences had demonstrated that human knowledge systems remained incomplete, and that the universe continued to hold mysteries beyond current understanding. The peaceful, respectful nature of the alleged encounters also offered hope for those who worried about the implications of contact with non-human intelligence. If the villagers' accounts were accurate, the beings they had encountered showed sophisticated ethical development, conducting their studies without interference or harm to the human community they observed. This suggested that intelligence and technological advancement might be accompanied by wisdom and restraint, rather than aggression or exploitation. For the scientific community, the case highlighted the limitations of purely physical evidence in evaluating extraordinary claims. The villagers had provided consistent, detailed testimonies from multiple credible witnesses, yet conventional science required reproducible physical evidence that such encounters rarely produced. This disconnect suggested the need for new methodologies for investigating phenomena that existed at the boundaries of human understanding. The philosophical implications of the case extended far beyond questions of extraterrestrial contact. The villagers' experiences challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and humanity's relationship to the cosmos. Whether interpreted literally or metaphorically, their accounts suggested that existence might be far more mysterious and interconnected than mainstream scientific materialism typically acknowledged. As our journey through this remarkable story draws to a close, we find ourselves in the same position as the villagers of San Antonio de Pintuyacu, confronted with possibilities that expand our understanding of what might be real while remaining forever beyond definitive proof. The events of July 2023, whether they represented genuine contact with non-human intelligence or something else entirely, had permanently altered the consciousness of those who experienced them and those who heard their accounts. The Amazon rainforest continues its eternal cycles, indifferent to human attempts to categorize and understand its mysteries. Ancient trees reach toward the sky, rivers flow endlessly toward the sea, and countless species pursue their intricate dance of survival and reproduction. In this vast green world where indigenous communities maintain their traditional connections to the natural environment, the boundaries between the possible and impossible remain fluid and permeable. The villagers of San Antonio de Pintuyacu have returned to their quiet routines, fishing and farming and gathering medicines as their ancestors did before them. But they do so with the knowledge that their small corner of the world has touched something vast and mysterious, something that challenged their understanding of reality and expanded their sense of what the universe might contain. Their story serves as a reminder that mysteries surround us constantly, that the universe remains far stranger and more wonderful than our everyday experience suggests. In our busy, technologically saturated world, it can be easy to forget that reality extends far beyond the boundaries of our immediate perception and understanding. The experiences of these Amazonian villagers invite us to remain open to possibilities that exist beyond the edges of conventional knowledge. As you rest here in the quiet of this evening, let yourself feel the peace that comes from contemplating mysteries without needing to solve them. The story of San Antonio de Pintuyacu reminds us that the universe is vast beyond comprehension, filled with possibilities that our current knowledge cannot fully grasp. In acknowledging the limits of our understanding, we find a particular form of humility and wonder that can bring deep tranquility to the restless mind. Whether the villagers encountered visitors from another world, representatives of an unknown terrestrial civilization, or something else entirely, their experiences demonstrate that reality contains layers of mystery that continue to unfold. In this recognition, we can find both comfort and excitement. Comfort in knowing that existence extends far beyond our worries and limitations, and excitement in contemplating the infinite possibilities that might await discovery. Let yourself sink into this sense of cosmic mystery and wonder. Feel the vast Amazon forest breathing around you in your imagination, its ancient trees holding secrets that span millennia, its rivers carrying stories from the heart of the continent to the sea. In this green sanctuary where the boundaries between the known and unknown remain permeable, anything might be possible. Rest now in the peace that comes from accepting mystery as a fundamental aspect of existence. The universe is far stranger and more beautiful than we can fully comprehend, and in that strangeness lies a profound source of wonder that can carry us gently into the restorative depths of sleep. Let the mysteries of the Amazon, the courage of the villagers, and the infinite possibilities that surround us all settle into your consciousness like a gentle river finding its way to the sea. And in this quiet space of wonder and possibility, allow yourself to drift peacefully into whatever dreams may come, knowing that you are part of a universe filled with mysteries that continue to unfold in ways both subtle and extraordinary, both distant and surprisingly close to home.